Okay. Hello, artists. Welcome, welcome. Let me just sound check this. If you're here, let me know who's here, who's tuning in, and where you are tuning in from. Hello, artists. Welcome, welcome. Okay. Let me just sound check is good, everybody. All right, so today is the second day's painting on this piece right here, which I started yesterday. On Monday, I walked everybody through my thought process and how to set up a still life and tips for that, all kinds of tips and tools and techniques in that video. If you missed that and you're wanting to improve your still life compositions, go and watch that video. It will be available here for 30 days or for the month of February. During this February challenge that I'm doing, I'll be here every Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. doing a live demonstration painting. It's going to be just a mix of things this month. So if you are not an Art Life School member, you can use these videos this month right here on my Facebook page. Be sure to like the page and make sure to turn on your notifications for the page so that you can get notified whenever the next video comes up. Also, if you engage and comment, you'll be shown these videos, whenever I'm doing them. Okay, so if you're an Art Life School member, these will be available permanently inside your Art Life School library, your video library underneath the live workshops or longer demonstrations. I can't remember exactly the category that it's called there. So welcome, everybody. So good to see all of you. I see some familiar faces popping in. So good to see you. Where did it go? Okay, I'm scrolling challenge this morning. Good morning, Barbara. Good morning, Marion from South Carolina. Good morning, Marty Robson. So good to see you. So good to see your beautiful faces. Good morning, good morning. It is super, super snowy here. We got so much snow last night. It's crazy. So yesterday, this week, what we're doing is I'm walking you through how if you've missed any of the other ones, go and watch them. But basically, for those of you who maybe want to try working a little bit longer on a painting or breaking a painting up into, a few sittings, into a few days work, for whatever reason, maybe you just like to work slower. Maybe you don't have that much time and don't feel like you can get to a completed painting, maybe even a smaller painting you feel like you can't complete wet into wet in one sitting. So this is just a different approach to painting wet into wet or alla prima and going from start to finish in one painting sitting. And so there's a lot of similarity between the two approaches. Sometimes these are called the alla prima or wet into wet painting, where you're completing everything while the paint's still wet. A lot of times that's called direct style painting. So many different, what is it with us human beings that we come up with all these different words and definitions and labels and anyways, but this is this is what we're dealing with here. And then this style of painting is often called indirect painting, where you're not completing the painting wet into wet. You are doing a little bit of work on it each day. And in my case, the paint is going to be dry for the most part from day to day, because I'm using a speed drying medium, which is the Winsor & Newton Liquid Light Gel. And this speeds up the drying of your paint. And so a lot of this paint today, especially since most of this is where I use most of that medium is in the underpainting. So most of this paint is going to be dry at this point. So that's the main difference, I would say. Okay. Good morning, Lucy. Aw, you're so sweet. Morning sweetness, right back at you. Okay. Good morning, Kathy Kepler. Yay, you're early. Awesome, awesome. Good morning, Coral. Good morning, Gail Knowles. So good to see everybody here today. Okay, cool. Beautiful. And as per usual, just drop any comments that you have or questions along the way that come to mind. If you want to paint along with this, I've posted the photo reference. You can find that right here on my Facebook page in a separate post. Okay, good. Well, let's dive in and get started, shall we? We shall. One thing I did want to mention on if you're going to do this type of painting where you're going to work on it several days in a row, you do want to make sure that you choose, it seems common sense, but I feel like I need to, throw it out there in case, in case you maybe make this error at some point. And that is to make sure that you're going to choose objects that are not going to go bad in your still life, right? So there are some flowers that will last longer than others. Sunflowers are one of those. Carnations are another. You probably don't want to do a 3-day painting with perhaps roses. They'll change a lot. Tulips will change a lot. So if you are doing flowers, and of course you can also use, put your floral in some fruits you can put in the refrigerator to make them last. But I recommend, just choosing things that are not going to change that much as they're sitting out on the still life stand. I just like to not really mess with mine. It's challenging sometimes with flowers, even if you put them in the refrigerator or whatnot, they're probably still going to change. At least real flowers, obviously, is what I'm talking about. They're probably still going to change quite a bit from day to day and then just get kind of jostled around anyway. From, moving from the refrigerator back to the still life stand. So I just prefer, if I'm going to paint something over a course of a few days, that I leave it up on the still life stand until it's done. So I'm going to put out the colors that I think I'm going to need. Obviously, I need a white. I'm using my favorite Kremnitz white from Old Holland. This is PW1, which is a lead carbonate white. I'm not sure why it's called Kremnitz white versus flake white or, any of that nonsense. I don't know if it's just that's what Old Holland decided to call it. I don't know. But flake white and Kremnitz white are basically lead whites. I love lead white for chiaroscuro oil painting like this, which is that really kind of more dramatic, darker background with just a little bit of light. You can think about artists like, Rembrandt or Caravaggio, artists like that. Actually, this is kind of how most artists painted prior to Impressionism. So, anyways, versus if I'm doing plein air or a higher value painting, or more of like an impressionistic color type of palette, then I will tend to use a titanium zinc white if possible, because the zinc will warm up the white, the titanium a little bit, because titanium white is very, very cold white and super, super strong tinting strength white. This is a very gentle tinting strength white, so you actually need more white and less color in your lights. All right. That was a question that came up on our Q&A call for the Art Life School on Monday. So Art Life School members, if you missed that, you can rewatch that Q&A call, and I go into even more depth and detail about why I prefer that white for this kind of painting. Okay, so some cadmium lemon. Let's see if this cad yellow deep is still any good. Yes. So cadmiums are pretty slow dryers. You can probably leave them on your palette, you know, for up to a week without even worrying about storing or closing the lid or anything. And the color will probably still be good. Cadmiums dry much slower than your earth tones. Your earth tones will dry out faster. So in terms of palette management, you don't have to worry too much about putting out too much of the cadmiums. I would say cadmium, alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue tend to be very slow drying pigments. So those will last longer on your palette. Ivory black as well. All the other colors will dry faster, especially the earth tone colors. They're just drier, you know, drier pigments anyway. So, all right, let's see. Got Cad Yellow Deep there. And I do want some ultramarine blue. I have to say, I really do love this Charvan's Ultramarine Blue Deep from Charvan. And my other favorite ultramarine blue is from Vasari. I need to kind of try some other brands. As much as I love Sennelier, their ultramarine blue is not very good. So I don't recommend theirs. Not all pigments are created equal across the different brands. I know I'm going to need that blue for the vase. And then, like, this is a Sennelier pigment, which is the alizarin crimson. The kind of paint that I tend to like has a little bit more oil in it. Not more filler, but more oil. Okay, and then obviously the longer you have a tube, like sometimes it takes a long, long time to use up a tube of cadmium red light, like this tube. The longer the paint is in your tube, the more dried out it's going to get. You know, the aluminum stearate that we add to paint to make it last in these tubes are, you know, basically over time the oil is going to, you know, evaporate essentially. So make sure that you're not painting with too old of paint. I remember I had a student once in a workshop that had such old paints, and she took a great deal of pride in her really old paints. And the fact that she only paid, some of them still had a price tag of 25 cents on them, which tells you how old they were. Seriously, I'm not kidding. I was in shock. I was shook. And they were so, the paints were so bad. They were so dried out. And then she would have to use like all of this terpenoid or mineral spirits to try to get the paint to do anything. And then that just further dried out the paint because mineral spirits is a paint, paint thinner, essentially. It's strips the oil even further out of the paint. She probably would have been better off trying to add a little bit of oil. Anyways, it was one of those students that no matter what you said, to try to invite them to consider changing their ways, she never would. And her painting suffered for it, unfortunately. So, but sometimes people are just going to do what they're going to do and they're stubborn. So that's just the way it is. Anyway, so just be mindful of that. You know, just because a paint is in a tube does not mean it's going to last forever, especially oil paint. I don't really know enough about acrylics to know like how long acrylics last. Okay, so burnt sienna. I don't know if I'm going to need any burnt sienna actually, but let me go ahead and put some out anyway. All right, so that should be good. We've got Naples yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium lemon, cad yellow deep, cad red light, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and ivory black. This is not a genuine Naples yellow. A genuine Naples yellow is a lead-based pigment as well. This is imitation Naples yellow, which means that it is made with titanium white. So this is also a pigment that is going to last, quite a bit on your palette because titanium white is a much slower drying time than a lead-based pigment, okay? Anyways, I don't know if any of that information is helpful to you, but just kind of talking you through. we've got another bot today. Please ignore that. Let me see if I can delete it. Yesterday it was a bot talking about they had HIV. It's like, what the hell? Okay, delete. Okay. I may not be able to do it while I'm on here. Okay. So I may not be able to delete that comment. So just while I'm on here, just so you know. So just ignore that. Yeah, 11 by 14 is the size. Again, if you missed anything, go back and watch yesterday's painting as well to, get it built up to this point. All right, so now I can, usually on these, what I do is I just check and see, is everything dry? I guarantee you this black is not dry. I guess I shouldn't say I guarantee you, but it's still a little tacky, see? Still a little tacky. So you can, hi Mary, hi Lynn, morning, good morning. You can do kind of a faux oiling out if any of your colors have set back, or you just want kind of more of a slippery surface to paint into. I wouldn't use oil. I would stick with the same medium that I'm using, which is liquid. I don't really need to do this, but I'll show you how I would do it in case you want to do it. Again, because I'm painting on panel, pretty much all the colors, however they go down, they don't really set back that much on panel because a panel is less absorbent. So you can see that that's not really changing the value or the color much. The reason why sometimes people oil out or do something like this or use like a spray varnish or something, not a retouch varnish is what I mean, is sometimes, especially on a dry cotton canvas, these darks will really set back. So if you do this, I would just use the same medium that I used. Okay, and I would just be careful not to go over anything that's wet, like these dark grapes. But again, personally, I'm not really finding any value in doing that because I'm working on a high quality surface and the colors have not set back at all. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I think, is start with that bold red, that deep dark red in the background. It's a simple color, it's a large amount of space, and it's going to establish a very strong color in the painting. I'm going to start in the darks with the ivory black, alizarin crimson, and some cadmium red light, just to get a nice, deep, rich red. Oh my gosh, where are all these bots? Now we've got a herpes one. Okay, deleting that. Okay, I guess I'm not going to mention it because it'll be on the video even after I delete the comment. Just delete and move on. All right. So this is that deep dark red. Now you can kind of put this on relatively thinly here, almost like a glaze. If you want to leave some of that value showing through. And then I think I'm going to make this one a little bit darker with some ivory black and alizarin crimson. So I hope everybody is, getting inspired this month. It's definitely helping me doing this February challenge to get my creative juices back going again and just, kind of get back in the saddle. Sometimes if we've been away from even just a particular subject, like still life painting, we can feel a little rusty, feel like we've maybe, oh gosh, how do I do this again? Maybe you've been away for months, maybe just, a few weeks. And again, it can also, you can even get kind of rusty just, for example, for me being gone in Europe, I mostly was painting landscapes whenever I was painting. And so there is a different obviously it's a different thing to paint a still life versus a landscape. So I'm just adding more red where I see more cadmium red, where I see it's a little lighter or more vibrant. And then I'm adding more black or alizarin crimson where I see that it's a little bit darker and richer. So this is definitely helping me. So far, all I've done is still life. So that's really getting my still life wheels turning again, and just getting back into the flow of that. So if you paint multiple different genres, or even maybe you even create in different media, like maybe you do a little bit of pastel and you also paint in oils, or maybe you do some watercolor, that as well. If you go for a long period painting in just one of those media or material, you can kind of get a little rusty feeling whenever you get back to the other one. So I want to push, this is nice and rich and deep right away. I can always lighten it here and there whenever I need to. I try not to, cover up too many of my edges, my lit edges. You need very little of the cadmium red light in the darks. It's going to really lighten that value. So I'm just going through and getting all of my shadow reds that I'm seeing over here. And again, these can be put down kind of thinner since it's in the shadows. It doesn't have to be super thick paint. That will also give me a nice contrast between thin versus thick. Painting is really all about these contrasts. And I also carry that deep red over the umber, from yesterday. Also back here where there's a little cast shadow on the cloth. Back behind the ginger jar is blocking some light from the cloth back here, and that kind of helps also make the lemon pop out more. Okay, I'm going to switch down to a little bit smaller brush. Hey, thank you so much, Lucy. So glad you like this composition. Me too. When maybe you're looking in the Art Life School group, these are just going to be posted here on my Facebook page. I'm not sure. But all of them are posted here on my page if you missed any of them. I got some nice new brushes from Silver Brush. Love these. All right, so when there's more light here, I'm going to use more cadmium red, as I said, with some alizarin crimson. It basically kind of makes almost like a cad red deep. You could also use a little burnt umber, which is a red-based umber, if you feel like it's too vivid of a red and you just want to kind of mute it a little bit, get it a little, maybe not so Bozo the Clown or Christmas red. That's a nice trick to use as well, is a little bit of burnt umber. Especially for this style of painting, this kind of classical look. Burnt umber is a great neutralizer to use. Burnt umber or raw umber. But anything that's a red based, and I want to keep it in the red family, I would reach for burnt umber over raw umber, because raw umber tends to have a little bit of green or just kind of a grayish tone to it, so that would end up kind of cutting some of the red. Now we're painting in the lights now, and so that means I'm going to start maybe building up, and especially we're painting in front, not in back, so I'm going to start building up more paint up here. Even if, I know I'm going to work on this again, still you want to go for the finish, even if you're not going to finish that day, really be thinking about finished effects. You don't want to have to come in here and kind of repaint the whole painting every single day. So if you can get finished effects, in this day 2 sitting, go for it.
And then I'm going to go ahead and soften that into, the shadow is really just kind of a gentle taper into the shadow here. So I'm just kind of gently going to kind of taper that into that shadow color. And it's not really a formed shadow. The fabric is just kind of bending back a little bit, which is nice. There's little pieces of light that are picking up. So I'm just painting a little bit of those little pieces of light into that cloth. Make sure you're using good quality paint, a good brush, a good surface, and good medium. Now I'll probably use less medium, I will use less medium in the lights because you want thicker paint. But where you have medium down already, like in these darks, is where you can get a nice, gentle kind of slide wet into wet. So it's not like you're not doing any wet into wet techniques or painting in this kind of process. You are. It's just you're not really completing it in one sitting. So basically, this is stage 2 that I mentioned. There's 3 stages. Well, what I've come up with is that there's 3 stages to the painting, and this is how I teach, and you can complete all 3 stages in one sitting, or you can stretch it out over the course of a couple of days or a few days. So the first stage of the painting is what we did yesterday, where, we did our tone, we did our size and placement, we put in our shadow shapes. You can also paint in your background color in that stage as well. I opted not to do that since I knew we're going to have our background color is this bold red. And, I felt like it was going to be more beneficial to wait to paint that background color in. So that's stage 1. And then stage 2 is really all about building up, the light and color on all of your objects. And if you haven't painted in background color yet, you would do that in day 2 and stage 2. Just seeing where there's a little pocket of light here under the grapes, a little pocket of that red light before it goes into shadow. So I go ahead and make a sharper edge where I have more clarity of edge, like light is behind that grape and it's really kind of popping out the grapes. And then just kind of gently brush over the edge into the shadow to create a softer edge. You want to do that on day 2 as much as you can, because otherwise, you're going to need to soften. I would need to soften those edges tomorrow. And in order to do that, I would have to repaint all of this color. And that is just, to me, just such a waste of time and energy. Why do I need to repaint, all of this? So I'm just trying to soften some edges right away at this stage. And anything that feels like, this is a cast shadow, so it will be a little bit sharper, but it's fabric, so it doesn't want to be super, super sharp. But there's little things like maybe a little dimple here, or, how there's a little bit of shadow, dimple in the fabric, a little shadow that makes this fold, stand out more. So I prefer to soften those edges now at this age. Just looking for all these little shadow shapes. There's another little kind of pinch here in the fabric, which are really nice. Where you have those little pinches in fabric, it gives a lot of depth and dimension to the fabric. And you want to focus those efforts a bit more up in the front versus in the back, I would say. Because, the background, you just kind of want that to disappear a bit more. I'm just going to soften those edges a bit more. Hello, Betty. Hello, Vika Baker. Welcome, welcome. Oh, good. I'm so glad that you are enjoying this. It's awesome. Thank you, thank you. My days are getting better and better every day and in every way. Life is good. Life is good. And we have to be vigilant, about staying focused on that, especially in, very trying times, or, go on a diet from the news for a while. We really have to protect our energy these days and our focus, and, what we're focusing on and what we let in. Definitely. Otherwise, we can kind of let all the negativity, fear-based thinking just kind of suck the life right out of us. So I'm just pushing some lighter color red paint out along this edge. I'm just loading a little bit more red on the tip, and just with brush handling, just kind of very gently. But you have to have solid paint on your brush. You have to have paint on your brush. This is a big mistake I often see made, is trying to do that with, either the paint is not loaded properly on the brush, like on the tip of the brush to do techniques like this, or the paint is too much in the ferrule of the brush, inside, deep inside the bristles, and the paint is too wet. You can't get specific brush work like that if your paint is loaded like that on your brush. So I'm just trying to get some of these lit edges that, the fabric kind of curls back, and those frayed edges that are catching light. So it's not like you're not getting any kind of paying attention to any finished effects. You are, like I said, you're trying to think ahead, like, okay, I'm going to have to repaint some of this tomorrow. So I'm trying to minimize how much I have to repaint. The third day, I don't want to have to repaint everything, especially these larger areas. It's a little easier to repaint a lemon if need be, but to repaint this whole red cloth, that's going to take some time, as you can see here by how much time I'm taking painting it the first time. So I'm just looking for some of these folds. There's a little fold here. See this little pocket of fold here. And then if I got too much of that dark paint on my brush, I just tend to, you don't even have to wipe it off since we're working red on red. I just tend to kind of twist it out of my brush and then add more of the lighter red to the mixture. So make sure anytime you do have a curved fold like this, that you curve your brush strokes, to create the dimension of that tubular form. It's kind of like a little tube shape. And then you can also build up more impasto where there's more light. And tomorrow I can make this look even more light, more lit up, and build even more light on top of it. Okay, but right now I'm already trying to get some sense of the form and where the light is climaxing on the form. So on a tabletop, that's going to be like the edge of the fabric, like right here, you see that little bit of sheen going on there. And then it's not going to be that hard edge because fabric is soft and it kind of has this gentle roll over the edge of the wood. So you can create that kind of more gentle roll. There's a little, pocket of red light here. They almost look like little commas whenever they're pinched like that. You get these little pockets. And again, like if this is reading too hard edged, where that connection is, just kind of take your bristles of your brush and just kind of soften into that. Okay. And then once you get that established enough, you want to move on so that you're not, doing all the detail on the red cloth wet into wet, and you want to relate these other values, but I started with the bold color, right? Like the yellow also is a bold color, but that's such a small shape. I started with the biggest, boldest color that's taking up the most amount of space. And it's an easier color to solve with the red. So it's going to be easier for me to relate these other colors to it. So that's why this color back here is just like, it's no color, right? It's a neutral, and I don't really know quite yet what that neutral is going to be. So I'm trying to solve these bolder colors first, and I'm going to have colors to work with on my palette in order to come up with whatever this color back here is going to be. I just know that this is going to be just kind of, just a neutral. I don't know how warm, how dark. Is it going to be more green? Is it going to be more gray? I don't really know yet. Hello, Carol. Welcome. Good to see you. Good morning, Trish. And yay, Barbara. I'm so glad that the watching the fabric maybe a little bit slower, is also helpful. Awesome. Okay, so going from something red to blue here is maybe the most challenging with the same brush. You can switch to a different brush. You can clean out your brush and let it dry. If you're cleaning it out with mineral spirits, try to really dry the mineral spirits out of it, because otherwise, it's just your brush is going to be so wet. You do not want super thin, wet paint whenever you're painting the lights. So either really clean that brush, or especially if you don't have the courage of your convictions here to use the same brush, which I do recommend you try to get better at, because I don't use mineral spirits to clean with during the painting, even though there's pigment in here, it's not wet, so it's not going to affect, it's still a pretty dry brush, right? So it's not really going to affect the color that I'm using here. So I'm going to start with ultramarine blue and some Naples yellow, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre. And also in this case, if a little bit of red or burnt umber sneaks in there, it's probably okay because it's red, blue, and yellow, and it's just going to create more neutral. This vase is not white underneath, just so you know. You can also use, if that's feeling maybe a little too blue, you could also bring in a little touch of ivory black with it to get it to read a little bit more neutral. It's kind of a grayish tone, I would say kind of a yellowish gray is the underneath color on this ginger jar. I like to start, more light, and then the yellow might be taking it too yellow, so then you may have to switch and add a little bit of white in the mixture. I like to start my brush strokes in the center of the form, especially where there's, the most amount of light is hitting that object. And you want to really get that paint nice and thick enough, okay, so that, it really pops against the background. So you want thicker paint in the lights, thinner paint in the shadows. So your thickest amount of paint should be where the forms are most lighted, most lit up. Yeah. But again, if you're watering down your paint too much, that can really pose a problem. Now you can change the look of something just by painting thinner, right? So you can use the same color, but just kind of putting it on thinner is going to make it look less lit up. So as this is, kind of coming down the form and maybe getting less light, you can just use less paint. Thinner paint will dry darker and duller. Thicker paint will dry more colorful, more accurate to the value that you mixed on the palette. So I'm just going to go through and get all of my light colors. I'm going to also in stage 2, you establish your highlight. You don't wait until the third stage to get a highlight, even though that might feel like, yeah, but isn't a highlight a finishing detail? And it's like, yes, it is. Yes and no. You know, it's like highlights create the form, tells you where the plane change is. It tells us, brings focal point to the center of the form. So in that way, I see it as really part of the middle stage, because you can't, creating form is a fundamental. Creating the illusion of three-dimensionality on a 2D surface is a fundamental. For me, that's more of a building stage. I'm going to come back in later and relate some of these shadows. But for now, I'm going to move on to the light in the lemon. And the cad lemon is actually going to be maybe a little too light and too cool, so I'm going to add a little bit of cad yellow deep to it. And again, I'm thinking about the form, thinking about building up the light shape here. But at first, you just kind of have to get some paint down. You got to get some paint down to work with. Okay. The little nub there, and then same idea, I'm going to kind of build up a little more light and paint around that plane change where the highlight is. If you're wondering what I mean by plane change, it's where the form is turning, and the highlights always fall where the top plane is meeting a side plane. In this case, the top plane and the left side plane. So it's going to be nice and rounded on a rounded form. But that's where you're going to have more light concentrated. And that's also where your highlight is going to land. So I'll just kind of put in a little bit of white here. You can use straight white, it's fine, to create that highlight. Okay. And then while I'm here, I'm going to grab a little bit of this cad yellow deep, kind of start to get in just a note for myself of how this color is going to reflect back into this color. All right, you want to get in your shadow colors as well at this point. And so I'm going to make shadow color for the ginger jar. Your shadows should be warmer in this case and darker in value. So I might just put it on my palette right next to the light color, and that might help you be able to judge your value relationship better. I'm starting with some burnt umber, some ivory black, and some yellow ochre. Okay. Yellow ochre is going to lighten it a bit and kind of cool it off a bit. You want it to be light enough that the dark blue stands out. Again, I'm just going to soften this transition wet into wet. Slowly, slowly. So the shadow color here, you want it to be light enough that the dark blue is going to stand out on it. You want it to be dark enough that it makes sense in the value context of your design, right? So meaning if it's a darker value painting, even on a white object, you'll go probably a bit darker in value in your form shadows. If it's a lighter background painting, all of your shadow values are going to be a little bit lighter in value. Does that make sense? So your shadow should feel more related to like the overall value of your background is one kind of easy way to think of it. It kind of needs to be, a nice marriage somewhere, it needs to be related to the object obviously as well, but make sure that it feels related to the overall concept of your painting. Shadow really belongs to the unseen, you can also grab a little bit of since this is against that deep red, you can also grab a little bit of that red. You know, it belongs to the parts of the painting that are sort of the unseen in the painting. And then again, you know, just kind of softening maybe some of that edge, but just be careful not to soften it too much or lose too much shape. This has a cast shadow from a grape here, so you do want that to be a little bit sharper edge there. You know, really hunt for those shadows. You're looking around, you're hunting for cast shadows, you're hunting for the formed shadows. You're making sure that you're not missing any of those at this stage. So this is a formed shadow, meaning a cast shadow on the top plane of the ginger jar, because the lid is casting a shadow itself on the shoulders of the jar. Now, I would say that the pattern is going to do a great deal of work in terms of turning the form and creating more form on this jar, and also more visual interest. Now, I want something that's kind of in between these two colors, right? So about the halfway point on all of these forms is where, you know, the least amount of light is. So the light is first hitting the lit edge of the object. In this case is the left side of the edge. Okay, so you do want to make sure that that is nice and crisp and lit up. And then the highlight is the part of the form that's getting the most amount of light on it, the total burnout of local color. Let's see if I can pull that edge a little bit straighter. And then about this halfway point, you can start to see it where the color gets a little bit warmer. It's just slightly a little bit darker, little maybe more muted in color, less, you know, maybe kind of less local color. It starts to get a little bit slippery in, you know, what that color is. So you can also kind of mix, you can see if you can get there by mixing the color you did in the light and the color of the shadow. But sometimes that still doesn't quite cut the mustard. So you just want this to be very subtle whenever you do this. You don't want a big shift, a huge shift. It has to be, you can have a big shift from the top to the bottom, but it has to be so gradually done that none of us notice that you did it. It's so subtly transition from top to bottom, right? So you can definitely, you know, add more ultramarine blue, add more yellow ochre. As you get closer down to the bottom here, I'm also just trying to soften that edge wet into wet while I'm here. Same thing on this lit side. You can, you know, get a little more darker down there. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if that is making sense, or, you know, if that just confused you more. We've got shadow color down here on the foot as well. Going back to my shadow color with a smaller brush to get in this little small space with the burnt umber, yellow ochre, and ivory black. This should be even darker down here. I'll paint that light back into it here in a minute. Because there's less room, you know, like all these grapes and everything are blocking the light source over here. There's just like the teeniest, tiniest little peekaboo of light on the foot of the ginger jar right here. And it's just really, really small. A little more ivory black for where this is really turning under, and maybe creating a sharper edge there to create more overlap. And just a little bit of that darker color up here. This is also a perpendicular plane. perpendicular, perpendicular, meaning going up and down, versus the top plane. Okay, so those should be pretty close to the same value. And then I'm just going to take a little edge off here with a dry brush. Go darker on the shadow on the bottom, Lynn, on the bottom of the form. Oops. I've got another comment to delete. Okay. And tomorrow, we can make all of this, if any of it needs to be adjusted more, I can adjust it tomorrow. Okay, now form shadow on the lemon, I'm going to add some of my red in since I'm dealing with a red cloth and a little bit of, maybe some burnt umber or black. You want to be careful with lemons, just adding black or blue because it's going to make your shadow too green. And if you're painting this way, and you're using a speed drying medium like me, which you don't have to do that, by the way. You can definitely just use like a traditional oil-based medium, which will keep your paint wetter for day 3. But if you are using a speed drying medium like myself, then you just kind of have to accept that, you're going to have to repaint some of these sections tomorrow or kind of retouch. But if you can't do that, if you can't bring yourself to do that psychologically without feeling like, oh, I'm just going to put a little bit here and a little bit there and just change a little bit, and, that won't work. So if the speed drying medium is, just not the thing for you, then don't use it with this kind of painting, is what I would say. You don't have to use it, this way always works, and it's not the only way either, right? So just keep that in mind. There's so many ways to adjust your materials to get a working process that works for you. And that's the only thing you want to be concerned about is, does this process work for me? This way works for me. Working on a longer painting, it may not work for you. The biggest thing I've seen people struggle with is on day 3, just feeling like, oh, I can just kind of just do a little here and a little there. And it's like, then it starts looking kind of stiff and overworked. And I'm just going to soften that edge a little bit there. It starts looking a little fussy perhaps when, and we'll find out tomorrow, where that needs to happen. Now, I'm going to go ahead and paint in pattern. The reason being is because I do like the way that pattern goes on wet into wet. You could let this dry and do your pattern tomorrow and also kind of a glaze. I do feel like sometimes the tendency with that is that it can look a little stuck on. So I'm just starting with some ultramarine blue and a tiny, tiny bit of white. I'm just going to get my pattern started here. Now, the more pattern you put on, the less lit up this vase will feel because it's a darker pattern, so just keep that in mind. But the more blue that you add, the less big of a light this is going to have. But that is part of the design of the picture, with bringing in more pictorial interest to this object because it has pattern. I try not to put anything too dark right next to the highlight. So whenever I set up the vase, I try to twist and turn the vase to where there's not too much dark blue where the highlight is. That's just something just something I kind of learned to do a long time ago so that the center of the vase stays nice and lit up. And then you can go darker. I'm going to do a little bit of my red, background red color in with that blue just to get it a bit darker. And value as we come down the form, as we come into the shadow. You also kind of want to start to curve some of your pattern to describe the form. You do have to, change the value of your blue whenever you go into shadow. So I'm doing a little bit of black, no white, and even grab some of that red since when you have a really strong background color like that, you want to make sure you get some of that color into the shadows. And tomorrow I'll probably get some reflected light in there as well. Here with some of this dark blue, kind of creates like a lost edge against the background so that all stays nice and shadowy. Let me just make sure. It looks like my video is lagging a little bit on my end, but a little behind. So make sure I'm not missing any. So I'm trying to do the larger player objects first. I wouldn't start over here with these little things, with the little lemon wedge and the little grapes and the smaller luminaire. I wouldn't start there first. I'm going to start with all those big players first. Yay, Lynn, I'm so glad that seeing it a different way. And sometimes seeing it a different way is just like, oh, okay, now I know there's a different way. Whether or not we end up liking that way or not is sort of, it's all information is, powerful to have. Because you can also go, yeah, I'm not really sure if that's for me. I think I kind of prefer this other way better. So it's all good. And then sometimes, you might like doing it this way and sometimes too, I think, sometimes life circumstances could change, or even just from month to month or week to week, maybe we have less time to paint and this way just feels, or maybe we're just dealing with more anxiety in our life. We need less pressure. It could be all kinds of different reasons. So maybe just taking it a little slower feels better. I think it's important to have some options. The last thing you want to do when things are not going well is give up the things that are feeding your heart and your soul. And creativity is actually proven to reduce anxiety and to also help cure things like depression. And so, it's really important that we make sure that we hang on to that creative energy and try to nurture it, even just in the smallest of ways if we feel like that's all we can do. But it builds momentum, right? So even small efforts build momentum. Okay, I'm just putting a little more red into the back of this shadow because of the red cloth. Today, everything is working wet into wet, so naturally things that start happening is you lose your cast shadows under things. So you can either reestablish that today or you can wait until tomorrow. Okay. So I'm going to start mixing up some of the Luminera color, which is going to be pretty similar to what is in my vase color. Okay, I'm just comparing the two. There's just kind of this grayish type of color going on. So I've got some blue, I've got some red, I've got some yellow. And I can just kind of mix all that together to kind of, get sort of a no color. You want to try to avoid painting it with just hitting it with a ton of white right away. And I would say start a little bit thinner, which can be challenging to do with a white. So put less paint on your brush. And just kind of start building this more in masses. These are one of the things that I will be working on more tomorrow, but I just want to get them started today. The last thing I want to do is like perfectly draw them out. You know, right now I'm just kind of starting with a little bit thinner paint just to get the shapes built. I'm just kind of massing them in, using the ground, using whatever ground is there. If I see like one area maybe is a little bit darker, I'll kind of dip into a darker pile and just kind of paint that wet into wet. Some of these are facing away from the light, so they're darker. Just kind of dragging some of that background black color in there. So you just want some idea of where I'm going. I want some idea of where I'm going with this on day 3. Something to work with. And I think these are going to play really nicely once the paint is dry a bit more and I can really build up those kind of iridescent highlights wet into wet. Just kind of going side to side with my brush here. But you want to make sure that you have a kind of a dark enough gray. It's lighter than the background behind it, but not too light in value that the highlights and the light parts are not, you know, they'll stand out tomorrow against this kind of neutral, mucky gray. You don't have to get too soft of edges, you know, especially if you see a shape that's nice and clear already, you can go ahead and kind of make that shape a little more clear, but I wouldn't try to finish out all the shapes. Like this one is very clear to my eye, but I wouldn't necessarily try to finish them all out today. Why are we getting so many bot things? Come on, Facebook. It's ridiculous. Okay, yay, Lynn. Lynn says, this makes my creative process adaptable. Yes, so good to have that adaptability. Now, I don't feel like the grapes really need much today, but I think what I will do is go ahead and try to get some sense of, you know, finish with the highlights. You know, we're pulling out the highlights on the front center of the form, especially just a few, and maybe over here where there's a, you know, stronger separation. But I think I'm going to save those for tomorrow. And before I leave today, I definitely want to get in some background color back here. Something that I feel will work and a value that's a little bit darker. So I'm going to start with some medium, some ivory black, burnt umber, cad yellow deep. I'm thinking of kind of going a little bit greenish umber back here. And again, you can start this kind of thinner if you want to. And if you know that you want to keep some of that ground we talked about yesterday underneath, then definitely maybe kind of start your color more lower. And don't feel the need to kind of fill out the whole canvas with your color. You can also just kind of do some strokes that kind of layer over. One of the nice things about working indirectly like this is the ability to build up textures and layers. So whatever process you choose, you want to play up to that process. Do you know what I mean? You want to play up to whatever its strengths are. Painting wet into wet has its own strengths of that process that are very different from painting more onto dry painting, right? So I think it's just wise to not fight against the process, to work with the process. I mentioned yesterday, as we get closer to the horizon line here, which is the back edge of your still life in a still life, you're going to go a little bit lighter. In this case, since my color in the painting is really yellow in terms of what's bringing in the brightness, I'll add a little bit more yellow into it, maybe a little yellow ochre into that color. And again, it's just a gentle transition. It's not anything too bold or obvious. I like to do parallel strokes in the background and go with the direction of the plane. And while I'm here, I'm just kind of painting around these luminaria, maybe even making them a little more refined in shape or a little bit smaller. Make sure you don't lose your cast shadow. And then you can always pull back. It's always easier to paint these finer things on top of, the broader background rather than to try to work around a little fine, shape tomorrow. So can everybody kind of see that atmospheric effect that I'm creating? And tomorrow this will all dry darker. Yay, candy. So just keep that in mind. The thinner the paint, the darker it's going to dry. So today this is looking kind of, nice and lit up and atmospheric. Tomorrow it might, especially once I get these lights in, it might look a little duller and I may have to lighten it even more. So you want to be careful with this approach, feeling too attached to anything that you do, because it all may be subject to adjustment tomorrow. You didn't do anything wrong, it's just a different way of working. I will go ahead, because I know I want my lights to be, the more layers my lights get, the more luminous and lit up they're going to feel. So I'm going to go ahead and put in some Cad Lemon here and some Cad Yellow Deep. So that basically the more layers that you give things, the darks tomorrow, by putting on darker darks, it's going to make them darker and richer. The lights as well, more layers of paint and coverage in the lights is going to make them lighter and brighter. So I do kind of want to start some of these lights. I'm doing some Cad Yellow Deep on the underplane of the lemon slice. I'm going to go ahead and the Cad Lemon is in the center. Now, with a Kremnitz white or a flake white, this may be dry by tomorrow because it's a faster drying white. So just keep that in mind. That's the main thing to watch out for whenever you're working with this, working with this process is, that's the biggest challenge you'll face, is dealing with impasto or brush strokes that are maybe going in the wrong direction. And that's just part of the learning process though. So once you start to learn, basically the next day, whatever direction this stroke is going that I'm putting down now, if I put on another layer tomorrow, I really want to make sure it's going in the same direction of stroke. So make sure you've got your brush stroke going in the direction that you want it, or that you try to eliminate maybe, super distinct impasto brush strokes. But I'm not in favor of that, because you won't learn how to make brush strokes. You have to learn how to make brush strokes. And sometimes to learn, you have to screw up, right? And if you're anything like me, you've got to kind of make your own mistakes and errors, and then, just, it's super frustrating when it happens, no doubt. But it's got to happen. And the faster it happens, the better. Okay, I'm also putting in some more Naples yellow, a little bit of white here, just to go ahead and build up like this lighter, a little bit lighter. I'm not going to full light yet on these, but just kind of a base color to work with tomorrow. And hopefully this will be dry by tomorrow morning, 24 hours later. And I can, glaze and highlight and scumble on some of this tomorrow. I hope this is helpful. I hope it's, helping rather than confusing you more. You can go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and create like where I can see a sharp edge overlap with that highlight. Okay. I think that this is pretty much all I can do today on this stage. And there's one last little one. Can everybody see as well? And I'm just starting these as kind of one shape, one color. Can everybody see as well that things are starting to feel more fleshed out? The space is starting to feel more full now that we have light and color on it. And we still have so many more details to put in tomorrow, like stems and highlights and grapes. Like there's a whole grape here that got eliminated. One thing I am going to do before tomorrow is just put in like kind of a glaze of this burnt umber, a bit more on the tabletop plane, so I can play, that'll be dry tomorrow, and I can play more with the reflected lights that are in that tabletop plane tomorrow. You can also kind of do sort of a glaze today underneath if you want to go a little bit more darker down here, more dark. I'm going to raise up my table edge. You can see that it's a little off here, a little bit higher to be more in line with where the edge on the cloth is. Okay, so sometimes you catch things like that on day 2. I'm just going to simplify all this for now. We'll work on that more tomorrow. This acts, when you do a glaze kind of like this, it kind of acts like a big eraser, especially if you don't have too much thick paint underneath. Kind of erase some of those shapes and kind of bring it back to a simpler structure for now. Okay, so I think that is it for today. Let me see if there's any questions before we leave. I'm not going to soften any of this out with the soft hair brush like I did yesterday. I really want to kind of play with some of these textures. The only thing I am going to soften a bit is the edge of light to form shadow here. Just kind of drag a little bit of that light over the edge if I can, ever so gently with a clean, dry brush. I want to keep that cast shadow edge a little bit softer for now. Okay. And I think once I get, more light on this base tomorrow, just kind of build that base up more, get more details on this Luminera, then this is going to become even more powerful of a statement against that red tomorrow. So it's already in good shape, and I think tomorrow it can definitely be even stronger. Okay, let's see. Any questions? Questions? You can see that my base is a little bit crooked, so work on that tomorrow too. Yay, Eva! I'm so glad that you found this helpful. You are so welcome. Thank you for being here. Pam Engel says, I love this process of indirect painting or indirect observation. Lynn says, yes, it's coming alive right in front of us. Whoop, whoop. Betty says, so helpful. Good, Betty. I'm so glad to hear that. Let me open this up. I can't see all the comments at once for some reason. Good, good, good. Hey, thank you, Marty. So glad that you're enjoying this. Let me hit refresh. I think it's a little bit lagging on the feed for me. Whoop, where'd it go? So this one went a little bit longer today. My apologies for that, but it's kind of, you want to make sure when you stop in a good place. And you want to make sure when you stop that things don't feel too finished or too resolved, or else you probably won't go back into it tomorrow, right? So just keep that in mind. Try to keep it feeling a little bit open, which is also partly why I didn't want to do like one solid color that's just like painting a wall covered back there. Otherwise, I might just feel hesitant about making any changes tomorrow if I feel like any changes need to be made. Yay, Maria, you are so welcome. And yay, Hedda says a lot more things make sense now. Great lesson. Good, good, good. So so we will, Art Life School members will definitely have this in your permanent library so that you can refer back to this. If you ever need to. Candy says, always learning with each lesson. Awesome. Thank you, Candy. And Gail says, this is going to be absolutely beautiful. Thank you. I hope so. And releasing the attachment to that outcome as well. Okay. All right. Wonderful, everybody. So happy that this has been helpful to all of you in whatever way it has been. So happy to share. So many of these things are questions and struggles and challenges that I faced as a learning artist or an art student. And so a lot of this for me is like giving you guys what I wish I would have had in those early days. And also just trying to kind of share, like, here's the pitfalls I myself have fallen into in the past, and the, mistakes I made along the journey, and also mistakes I've seen art students make that I've worked with over the years. So, all right, everybody, wishing you all happy painting. Lorraine, so glad that you enjoyed watching this process. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to delete this last bot comment before we go. Okay. All right. Much love, everybody, and happy painting. Bye for now. See you tomorrow.